How's it going, everybody? I am ZBilbs, and I'm here today with another Metal Albums Ranked. Now I'm getting to another very heavily requested video, and that is going to be doing the 18 Judas Priest albums. Now this is obviously a very well-known band. They're very good, and it was incredibly hard to rank each of these albums. I think they've got mostly good albums. There's definitely some weaker to bad albums at the bottom. But generally speaking, obviously this is very tough. They have got some great albums. And also, before I get into the ranking, I'd like to say that this probably, I tend to have some opinions that are kind of out there, but this one probably is a little more out there than pretty much any other band ranking that I know of. I've watched a handful of other rankings that people have done for Judas Priest, and I have quite a few picks, or at least one in particular that is different than pretty much what anyone would put in the history of ever. So you'll probably know it after a bit, but there's an album that most people consider to be one of the worst, and usually cited as the worst Judas Priest album ever, that not only do I not dislike, but I actually love a great bit, and it's going to be higher than a lot of the classic Judas Priest albums. So if that's going to upset you, then I encourage you to click off this video right now. I don't know, leave a dislike if you want, but just some words of warning. I was even considering, just not making this video, or just I don't know, lying to myself and putting that album at a different spot, but who cares? Not that many people watch this channel anyway, so let's just get into it. Starting at number 18, I have got my least favorite Judas Priest album by a wide margin, and that is Jugulator. Now maybe why this one is so low could be because it's the only album that isn't on Spotify in the US. So I've only listened to it a couple times just on YouTube, and I haven't been able to re-listen to it much, but man, I just do not like this album in the slightest. There's a couple okay songs. It's Death Row and Cathedral Spires. Both of those songs are alright, but even then, I don't know if I would come back and listen to either of those songs much. The rest of them are they just feel so off to me. It's kind of the thing what people say about the Tim Ripper Owen era is that not only does he not have the same style as Rob Halford, which of course nobody really has the same style as Rob Halford, he's a legend, but it completely feels off of the whole Judas Priest. It feels more Pantera-esque, more groove metal-esque, which I haven't listened to much Pantera. But this album in particular, not only does it feel more groove metal, but it just feels, I don't know, it's almost like doing all of this weird experimental stuff. It's hard to describe, but all of these songs are just they are this is probably the heaviest Judas Priest album, with Demolition being right there, but it just, the vocals are just not good. I know it's not trying to be the same style as Tim the Ripper Owens, but it's just bad. I just don't like anything that Tim the Ripper Owens brings to the table here. It just feels just raw and edgy and just not good. I can tell, I know a lot of people actually really like this album, and they tend to see it as the better of the two Tim the Ripper Owen albums. But generally, I would say that Jugulator is really just is my least favorite of the two Tim the Ripper Owen albums. It just feels like Tim the Ripper Owens and hasn't quite found his groove with Judas Priest yet, and so the songs, I don't know, lack that oomph, that just fun factor that I get more from Demolition. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I just don't like this album. I like Demolition a lot more. But yeah, that's Jugulator coming in at my last spot. Well, whereas Jugulator, I would say, was very hard to describe the specific reasons for why I didn't like it, besides it just being just off and just wrong, just personal reasons. This next pick, I think it's pretty easy for me to just easy to describe why I don't like it much, and that is Rockarola at 17. This tends to be pretty low for most people's rankings, and I agree, and mostly just because, like, this is the one album that just isn't really metal. Now, generally, I don't have a problem if, metal bands have albums that are a little less metal, a little different than their style. I still like some softer rock and some, different stuff like that. But this album is just so much, like, lighter and different and just hard rock or even less that it doesn't feel Judas Priest in the slightest. It feels like they're going for, like, something completely different. And, there's still some good stuff there. Like, the title track, Rockarola, is genuinely an excellent song. It's just super fun and catchy. Also, One for the Road is a pretty solid song. But besides those two, the rest just nothing really special. They don't have the right style. Rob Halford hasn't figured his groove out. Judas Priest hasn't figured their groove out. It feels derivative of just other bands. And it's really not till Sad Wings of Destiny where they find their style. But that being said, where I don't love this album, I don't think it's a genuinely bad album like I do with Jugulator. So there is probably some enjoyment to get out of it. But that's what I got coming in at 17. Moving on to number 16, ahead of Rockarola by a little bit, I have got Point of Entry. Now, this is one album that just doesn't make sense to me why it is so just mediocre and uninteresting. Because, you've got that kind of, golden era of the commercial 80s era of Judas Priest, where you've got British Steel, and then a little bit after, Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, all just like boom, boom, boom. But then somewhere in there, hidden under the glory of those albums, you get this album, Point of Entry, right at 1981. So this is coming off their high of British Steel, and somehow they gave us this album. And I don't know how they could have gone so wrong with this album, but they did. This album, the one song that everybody points to when they're like, oh yeah, there's something to like about this album, it's Heading Out to the Highway. And that, honestly, I don't love that song. I think it's all right. Also, Hot Rockin', I think, is an okay song. Don't love it either. The one saving grace for me from this album is Desert Plains. That is one of my genuinely favorite Judas Priest albums of all time. I think it's songs of all time. It's fantastic, but the rest of this album is just kind of trashy. There's just nothing memorable about this. It feels like it's kind of similar style to what they were doing with British Steel, but it lacks the energy and the creativity and the passion and just anything really interesting that British Steel and then the later the following 80s albums would have. So I don't know, but Point of Entry, it's just not a great album. But Desert Plains holds it up. It probably would have been down there closer to Jugulator if it didn't have Desert Plains, but yeah, that holds it here at my 16th spot. All right, so we've only gone 3 albums into this list, and already I would say we are now separating the point from the bad albums to the okay albums, the albums that aren't great, but I still think that there's a decent amount to enjoy from all of these next chunk of albums coming up. And starting that off at my number 15th spot, I've got Angel of Retribution. Now this is going to be, I'm sure I'll have some, unpopular opinions, but this is definitely going to be an unpopular one. I don't love this album. There's definitely stuff to like here. But, people saw this as like a return to form for Judas Priest. They finally get Rob Halford back and, they're back on track and everything's good again. But I liked it better when we had Demolition with Tim the Ripper Owens. That's not to say this is a bad album. Obviously, I say that it's like, okay, it's decent, but really, this album, it's kind of like Point of Entry. It just feels a little bit bland, a little bit stale, just a lack of just songs that kind of stick out there with me. Generally, people's favorite from this album is Judas Rising, which is a good song, but I don't love it. Other decent ones worth fighting for is all right. Demonizer is good. Let's see, we've got Angel is okay. It's a nice softer one. And then probably my favorite from this album is the long ballad at the end, Loch Ness, which what a weird subject. I don't know why they made a 13-minute song about the freaking Loch Ness monster, but all I know is that I kind of love it. But honestly, the rest of this album, just there's really nothing that interesting to me about this album. I just think it's kind of just kind of forgettable. But yeah, that's Angel of Retribution at 15. Moving on to number 14. Now we're getting into that weird late 80s era of Judas Priest with my 14th spot, Ram It Down. I forgot it for a second. But yeah, Ram It Down. This is not a bad album by any means, but it's definitely one of the more middling albums or mediocre albums that Judas Priest has got. Now, apparently this album was supposed to be like half of Twin Turbos, like kind of the follow-up to Turbo that they were going to have. So half of it kind of has that glam feeling, and then the other half is new and different, and I don't know which is which, but I mean, kind of, I think half of this album is kind of pretty solid, and the other half is just mediocre, so who knows, but you can already tell Turbo is higher than this anyways, so I think this one is just, it's kind of a mishmash. It's kind of a mess of styles, and it doesn't really know what it wants to be, and so it kind of just comes with like an album with some good shining songs in there. Some ones that I like, you've got Monsters of Rock. That's a decent, I think that's the closer, but that's pretty good. I'm a Rocker is okay. Love You to Death is okay. The two like genuinely like really solid songs from this album, I would say, is the title track, Ram It Down. That's pretty good. And then the best of the album, I think by a wide margin, is Blood Red Skies. I think that one is generally overlooked by most people, but I think it's honestly one of my favorite Judas Priest songs. It's excellent. But the rest of this album, just like Angel of Retribution, it's nothing really to write home about. And this is pretty close to Turbo in kind of quality, but I think Turbo gets the edge because it just knows what it wants to be a little more. Ram It Down just kind of feels a little all over the place and doesn't reach quite high of highs that Turbo does. So that's why it's here at my number 14 spot. But speaking of Turbo, moving on to my number 13 spot, we finally got Turbo. And what is often people's least favorite, or one of their least favorite, because it is the one glam album, or at least fully glam album, that Judas Priest did. But honestly, not a bad album. There's some good songs in there. Obviously, the title track, Turbo Lover, is a Judas Priest classic. It's one of their best. Judas Priest, I believe they still play it live to this day. So, not a bad song in the slightest. Then some other good ones. You've got Private Property, you've got Out in the Cold, and then you've got Hot for Love, which, honestly, I think that's just as good as Turbo Lover. I think it's a really good song. The rest, there's quite a bit of glammy schlock in there. There's just some, not so good stuff. But honestly, with those 4 songs, like one other decent one, it just a pretty good lineup of songs, and definitely some songs that surprisingly I have come back to and listened to quite a few times, which makes Turbo not quite a bad album. Obviously not one of Judas Priest's best by a long shot. Wouldn't even really consider it a good album, but it's definitely worth checking out a couple of songs in here. So that is Turbo at 13. Moving on to number 12. Here's another one that's heavily maligned, just like Turbo, because I've got Nostradamus at number 12. Now, Nostradamus, this is coming off of Angel of Retribution, which, most people love, and then Nostradamus comes out and they're like, what the frick is this? This is a freaking hour, 40-minute concept album from Judas Priest? What is this? And so most people don't like this album, mostly for the fact that it's just long as all heck. And it's just such a different style than most of Judas Priest stuff. It's much more like, I don't know, symphonic, or They have a lot of just extra stuff. It's very produced, much more, you know, story oriented in how the songs come about. But honestly, when you can get past the length and the different style, I think there's a lot to really love about Nostradamus. For one, just the fact I love a good concept album. I think a concept album done well just absolutely adds so much to an album. And honestly, I think this is an alright concept album. I'd say overall as an album, it's still in the like meh tier of Judas Priest stuff, just because it is just so incredibly bloated, and there's so many just like short instrumentals that I was like, you know, if you wanted to make just you know, an hour-long concept album, you just cut all of the fluff out of here and make a more compact album. But I guess they did want to go for something more like grandiose and artistic, and so I respect that. But I would say that something more compact would have been better, which is why this album isn't so good. But it has some genuinely great songs that I think most people miss out on because they're like, oh, this is just too long. But if you dig deep into some of this stuff, there's some actually really solid songs in here. Some of my favorites include Alone, Conquest, I think it's not the first, but the second song, Prophecy, the one that goes, I am Nostradamus. That's a genuinely great song. Then you've got Nostradamus as the second to last song, which is kind of a reprise of Prophecy, but it's also a solid song. Future of Mankind is a really long, epic ballad, but is genuinely awesome. And then probably my favorite from this album is Visions. I don't even know particularly why. I think probably just the chorus, the main hook is just really awesome on that song. But overall, I think just, you know, a really solid lineup of songs, just too bloated, that I think scares most people off, but not a bad album by any means. So Nostradamus, it's all right, and that's coming in at number 12. Now, getting into number 11, now everything here on up I think is good to great. We're getting into these next few I think are like good albums. Like we're past the mediocre or the middling albums. Everything from here on up is good. And starting off that at number 11, I've got Hellbent for Leather, or Killing Machine as it's known everywhere else in the world. But I think Hellbent for Leather is a better name, since Hellbent for Leather is a better song than Killing Machine. But yeah, whatever. But Hellbent for Leather, that's their last studio album from the 70s, and it's pretty freaking good. Honestly, when I first listened to this album, I was like, that might be one of my favorite Judas Priest albums. It ended up going down a little bit for me. I just think generally, how many times have I said that? Genuinely instead of generally. But the songs just aren't quite as strong as other albums. There's a good, like, it is good consistency across, but there isn't like any specific song that I'm like, that's a top tier song. Some of the best songs you've gotten here is Delivering the Goods. A lot of people's one of their favorites. I don't love it. I think it's still solid though. Burning Up I think is great. Running Wild is awesome. A lot of people love Evening Star. I don't know why. I don't really love that one. I think I don't know, Rob Halford just kind of sounds really weird in the main chorus, and it's like, Evening Star. Like, I don't know. I digress. Running Wild is good. Before the Dawn is excellent. And then Hellbent for Leather, obviously the title track is a classic, and that's probably the best from the album. But even so, I probably still wouldn't stack it up against some of the heavy hitter Judas Priest songs. So a really good, really consistent Judas Priest album, just doesn't quite stack up to some of those bigger ones, but still really good. And that's coming in at number 11. All right, now we're getting into the top 10. This is when it gets really tricky. But at number 10, I've got Stained Class. This is a lot of people's favorite album. And, you know, definitely there's a lot to love about this one. Obviously, I wouldn't put it close to my favorite album. I think it's pretty similar quality to Hellbent for Leather. I think this one's just got a little bit higher highs than Hellbent for Leather, but those two are pretty close. My favorite songs from this album, you've got Invader, Exciter, which a lot of people love, I think it's solid. Not my favorite from the album, but pretty good. Stained Class, the title track, is another really solid one. Better by You, Better Than Me. Dun dun dun, it's better by you, better than me. Obviously, that one's fantastic. It's just so freaking catchy. And then my favorite from the album is definitely Beyond the Realms of Death. That one is just, it's different than any other Judas Priest song that I've seen. It's, it's melancholic and it's high pitched and it's slow and it's fast and it's just everything you love about Judas Priest. It is absolute classic. But yeah, Stained Class, it's really good. Obviously not fantastic. There's about half of the songs I really like, the other half I don't much care for. But definitely really good. And that is coming in at my number 10. Moving on to number 9, I have got Painkiller. Now, another one that probably seems a little low for a lot of people. A lot of people really love Painkiller, and I enjoy Painkiller a good bit. This is when they're finally getting their groove again after that Ram It Down and Turbo era. But I think Painkiller, while it is good, it just doesn't quite stack up to other ones, obviously, which is why it's at number 9. But there's a lot to love. This is definitely probably like the most powerful that Rob Halford's voice gets out of like any other album. And obviously, the songs from there, you've got Painkiller, literally a freaking classic song. Like, I don't think there's a single other Judas Priest song where Rob Halford gets quite as like it's absurd. It's fantastic. All Guns Blazing is another really good one. Leather Rebel is good. Metal Meltdown is solid. Nightcrawler is awesome, really overlooked and good. And Between the Hammer and the Anvil is another really solid song. The rest, once again, aren't bad, just don't love them quite as much. But Painkiller overall, once again, just decent album. Just, not enjoyed by me quite as much as the next few. But yeah. All right, next up at number 8, I have got Redeemer of Souls. This is probably pretty high for, I don't think most people would put this one quite as high, but I think this is really great. This is finally, for me, once you get into Redeemer of Souls and then Firepower, I think this is finally when Judas Priest is getting back to their old swing of things. Like, it finally feels like, they're not trying to do all that weird stuff that, Nostradamus was, and Angel, it just feels like, Angel of Retribution, but they're actually inserting some new creative energy in there and just making some freaking banger tracks, like, to be honest. Like, let's see, what do we got on here? Redeemer of Souls, solid title track, nothing amazing. Halls of Valhalla is, I think, one of people's favorites from this album. I think it's pretty good. Hell and Back is nice. Metalizer is alright. March of the Damned is probably my second favorite from this album. I honestly really love that song. That's another like really great overlooked song. Sword of Damocles is really great as well. And probably my favorite from this album is Beginning of the End. I think that's probably like my favorite like more mellow Judas Priest song. Generally speaking, like I'm a sucker for a good like soft mellow song, but for some reason, like whenever like Judas Priest, at least they have one in every album of those like soft mellow out songs where you just like have Rob Halford like singing like low and cleanly and like sad, melancholic. And most of the time I don't love it because there's just no like catchy riff or hook that you get there. But like this song is just, for some reason, it's so freaking good. I think the chorus is just super memorable and fun, but it just gets me so much. Like Beginning of the End, genuinely probably top 5 Judas Priest song for me. Now, this album probably would be higher because there's a lot of songs I really like on here and like a lot of like really top tier songs for me, but it's like 13 songs long. And there is obviously a lot of like pretty mediocre songs along with it, but even still, the good and great from this album holds this album up to 8. But I can see why people would put it lower. But yeah, that is Redeemer of Souls. at number 8. Moving on to number 7, I'm getting into one of their most classic albums, and that is Sad Wings of Destiny. Now, this is where Judas Priest really came to their own after Rock-a-Rolla, when they were just kind of like, let's see what we are. We don't really know. Sad Wings of Destiny, now they're finally getting into their more metal-y roots, and this is why this is another one that kind of gets often cited as people's favorite album, because it is kind of just the origin. It's got a lot of classic Judas Priest songs, and this is a really great album. Just generally my preferred style is kind of that early 80s stuff. I love the 70s stuff too, but you're not going to see any of the 70s stuff like super high on my list, just because it's not really my preferred style. But still, this is a great album. It's super consistent in quality and great songs. Some of the best from the album: Isle of Domination, excellent closer. Epitaph is a nice opener to that one. That's another like more soft Rob Halford song that I really enjoy. Victim of Changes, I've seen a lot on the internet. This is like people's favorite all-time Judas Priest song. I don't get it. I don't love this song. Like, I think it's all right, but I really don't enjoy the song all that much. The heavy hitters from this album, definitely Dream Deceiver is an all-time classic. That's excellent. Tyrant is awesome, and my favorite by a good chunk from this is The Ripper. Just absolutely classic song, just fantastic song, and probably the best of like kind of the early 70s songs just in general. Now this is below some of the other, at least this next 70s pick, because while I think it might be a little more consistent, this next one just has more songs that are just higher up there, whereas this song, it's really just like The Ripper and Tyrant that are like my favorite. But this next album coming up has got more that I'm like, yeah, those are like really good. And that one would be coming in at my 6th spot, Sin After Sin. Another album a lot of people love. It's one of those classic 70s albums, and that is definitely my favorite out of all the 70s stuff. Absolutely, just excellent stuff across the board. It probably would be higher. I just don't love the 70s style quite as much. Some of the best ones on here: Sinner, Diamonds and Rust is one of them that they play a lot, and it's a good cover. Another really good one is The Last Rose of Summer. That's a nice mellow one. Let Us Pray / Call for the Priest, that's another decent one. Starbreaker, that's one that a lot of people love. I think it's just decent. My heavy hitters from this album, definitely, I already mentioned Sinner, but that one's actually one of my heavy hitters. Raw Deal is might be my favorite, but I think Dissident Aggressor probably edges it out just by a bit. But those two, Raw Deal and Dissident Aggressor, those are both just fantastic songs. Neither come quite to matching The Ripper in quality, but they're both like right there, like right below it, and overall I think just give the edge to this album over Sad Wings of Destiny just by a bit. But both are such great albums, it's hard putting them low, but that, low, quote unquote. This is still top of the list, but yeah, that is Sin After Sin coming in at number 6. Coming in at number 5, now this is where every album from here on out, like we're definitely past the good stuff now. We're to like just straight up banger albums from here. Everyone is a genuinely fantastic album, in my opinion. And starting that off at number 5, I've got Defenders of the Faith. This was the last of like that classic like early 80s Judas Priest era, or like the commercial era as a lot of people like to call it. And this is, once again, it's just Judas Priest doing their thing, and it's just as great as ever. Some of the best songs from here, you've got Free Will Burning, a nice opener, I believe. Jawbreaker, probably my second favorite from the album. I think a pretty overlooked song, but freaking fantastic song. Rock Hard, Ride Free, Love Bites, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll, all great. And my favorite from this album, probably my favorite Judas Priest song of all time, The Sentinel, is just oh, so freaking good when it's like the Sentinel, like, oh man, that, oh, it's so good. There are a couple not so good ones. Generally the other 80s albums are just this album, but they just have just more consistency. There's more songs that I would listen to, but especially this one and the next album are just like right there, and I could put Defenders of the Faith over my number 4th spot on a different day, but that is coming in at number 5. At number 4, speaking of the number 4th spot, I've got British Steel. Often cited as people's favorite of all time. This is like when Judas Priest is getting into their height, into their heyday, and that is British Steel. Obviously, it's got some of their most like played tracks, which is why a lot of people love it. It's also why a lot of people hate this album, because they're like, oh, this is overplayed garbage. Like, they play these songs on the radio all the time, whatever. And for me, it's like, yeah, it's got some overplayed songs, but it's also got some freaking banger songs, and I think it'd be a mistake to not put it at least somewhat high, and that's why it's at number 4. But the best songs from this album, in my opinion, you've got Rapid Fire, a great opener, followed by Metal Gods, another really great song. Breaking the Law, obviously, everybody knows it, everybody likes it. Honestly, this is the one song that I think it's loved a little bit too much. I think it's a good song, but I think it's a little overhyped. My head was not blown when I listened to this song. I was like, yeah, that's good, but it's nothing really to write home about. You Don't Have to Be Old to Be Wise. That's another really solid song. United is all right. And then the clear standout from this album for me is Living After Midnight. That's another probably overplayed song, but I think unlike Breaking the Law, I think it deserves to be overplayed. I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And then there's also Grinder, which is another just another great song. But all of those together, it's a little bit more consistent in the quality than Defenders of the Faith, in my opinion. But the heights are just right there, which is getting British Steel my number 4 spot. All right, now it's time for the top 3. This is when it gets really interesting, really controversial, you name it. But let's just get going. At number 3, I've got Firepower. Now this is just absolutely, Judas Priest, they're coming back on all their reunion era stuff, and this, I think, is finally when not only are they able to get their groove again, but they're able to get their groove so good that it's as good, if not better, than a good chunk of all of their previous stuff. Obviously, I put it higher than British Steel and Defenders of the Faith, so obviously I like it a great deal, but I think it's right in good company with that early 80s stuff, obviously with an exception to Point of Entry. But it's just, Rob Halford, he's a little bit old, but he's still got it. They're still hitting some freaking great hooks, some awesome riffs, just making some absolutely banger songs, probably some of the best songs Judas Priest has done. So some of the favorites from this album, you've got No Surrender. I guess I'm starting from the bottom for some reason, but it's a freaking great song. It's kind of like You've Got Another Thing Coming, but for a new era and maybe even a little bit more fast and intense. With old Rob Halford, it's awesome. Then you've got Spectre, which is probably it's really close. I think it's my favorite from this album. I think it's a pretty overlooked song, but it's fantastic. Rising from Ruins is excellent. Necromancer is excellent. Evil Never Dies, that's my dad's favorite song from this album. And I like it. I don't love it as much as he does, but I can definitely see that that's absolutely a great song. Firepower, title track, excellent. And then Lightning Strike, probably it's really close with Spectre as to whether that's my favorite song from this album, but such just great quality across the board. The songs just reach such high of highs. What I will say about this album, why it's not any higher, is that I'd say the first half is just like banger after banger after banger. Then you get to the second half and it's like, and then you get No Surrender. It's like, yeah, and then another like, one to end it. So the first half of this might be like the best half of any Judas Priest album out there. The second half is what keeps this album from, the top 2 spots, but still Firepower is a fantastic album, and hopefully if they do another album that it will reach these highs once again, but still so impressive for the age that they're at to make such a great song, such a great album. But yeah, that is Firepower at number 3. All right, now number 2. This is the part where y'all dislike, where y'all unsubscribe. And you write your comments in there. So get your fingers ready to write why I'm the worst person ever. But I've got Demolition coming in at number 2. I have not seen, I don't think, anybody, any list online on YouTube ever put Demolition above like 16 or 17 at the absolute highest. Whereas other like genuine like usual picks where I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why they would put this higher or lower. Like, I really don't get why people hate this album so much. I freaking love it. Not only do I think it shouldn't be hated, but I think it's an absolutely excellent album. That's why I'm putting it at number 2. I think this is just Jugulator, but you've actually got some genuinely great guitar work in there, some really fun, catchy riffs, and this is just Tim the Ripper Owens. He took that, I don't know, messy, garbly crap that he had from Jugulator, and he refined it. It still, like, feels, like, heavy and more groove-esque, but now it's just, it feels just cleaner and just more focused, more fun, more creative in the songs that you do, and just the songs just feel just more fun to listen to, more re-listenable in general, and I just have so much more fun listening to this album than Jugulator, and even a lot of the other Judas Priest stuff, to be fair. But let's go over which songs are my favorite from this album. One on One is heavy, intense, it's fantastic, I love it. Jekyll and Hyde is great. Close to You, there's actually a handful of like more like mellow, melancholic songs in this album that just work really well, and Close to You is probably my favorite of that style. In Between is nice. Feed on Me, another great one. Subterfuge is solid. Lost and Found, another good, like, mellow one. My 2 favorites are near the end. Cyberface, which it kind of feels like a Tim the Ripper Owens, like a kind of a weird techno take on Iron Man, with a more groove-esque style, and I still think it's fantastic. It's weird and new, but I love it. It's great. And then Metal Messiah is definitely my favorite from this album. That one is just super powerful, super awesome, such a freaking catchy chorus, just fantastic. And this album, well, most of the songs, even Cyberface and Metal Messiah, I probably wouldn't quite put in like a top into my top 20 Judas Priest songs, but it is just so consistent in its quality. They're almost like, I think there's like 2 songs, maybe 1 song in this entire album where I'm like, yeah, I don't much care for that. But everything else, like, not only do I think it's like okay, I think it's like genuinely good and worth re-listening to. So please tell me in the comments, why do y'all hate this album so much? If any of you like this album, then hey, pipe in. Maybe I'll awaken some other long-lost Demolition fans out there, but I love Demolition, so sue me. That's coming in at number 2. But coming in at number 1, actually by a wide margin, I think this is Judas Priest's best, and I don't think it's close, at least for me, and that is Screaming for Vengeance. Now, this is just the creme de la creme, just I think where Judas Priest has absolutely hit their peak. They're getting there, the 70s, they're like, yeah, it's good. You get to the 80s, you get to British Steel, and they're like, all right, now we're on the roll, and then Point of Entry happens. Oh, that didn't happen, never mind. Screaming for Vengeance, they're absolutely top of the mountain. And then obviously another great one with Defenders of the Faith, and then we start going downhill a little more, and it gets weird. But Screaming for Vengeance, like, honestly, just like freaking Demolition, it's so consistent in its quality. I think there's one in this entire album that I don't love. Every other song I think is good and worth listening to, and it's also got some just absolutely classic banger songs in here. So, my favorites, obviously, it starts off with Hellion and the Electric Eye, which is great. Not my favorites from the album, but I think still really awesome. Riding on the Wind is really good. Bloodstone is so catchy and fun. Just Bloodstone! Like, really overlooked, really good. Take These Chains, another really catchy, fun, and overlooked song. Probably second or third favorite on the album. Like, Take These Chains, really great song. Screaming for Vengeance, another classic. That's probably like the most like intense that Rob Halford has on like ever, pretty much. There's a couple other close ones. Obviously, Painkiller is one of the most intense, and another one on this album. You've Got Another Thing Coming. Obviously, it's might be their most famous song for good reason. It's one of my favorite songs. It's overplayed as heck, but unlike Breaking the Law, I think it stands with Living After Midnight as like justified in being overplayed because it's a genuinely fantastic song. Fever is another really good one, and then Devil's Child, that's another just fun, fast, intense song. Like, I believe you're the devil's child. Like, oh, so freaking good. I've got a family friend that's his favorite Judas Priest song of all time, and I can definitely see it. But yeah, that one's for you, Sando, if you ever listen to this. But that is Screaming for Vengeance. It's absolutely the best Judas Priest album, in my opinion. And I can't remember the one that I don't love from this, so look it up if you don't know. But still, like, this is just such a freaking great album. Just banger after banger on here, and the easy pick for my favorite Judas Priest album. But that is it. That is all 18 Judas Priest albums ranked. This has been a long time coming, so let me know what you thought. I'm sure a lot of you will have some bones to pick in the comments, so be civil about it if you can. But like or dislike, if you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe for some more metal content, some movie, video game content, whatever. I'll try to get some more stuff out as soon as I can. Comment below what other rankings or other videos you'd like to see in the future. But yeah, that's all I got for you. I'll see you later.